Our evolutionary tree is full of some pretty famous branches. Us, obviously, Neanderthals, Homo erectus, the Australopithecines, and loads more besides. Most of these lived more recently than 4 million years ago. That's not so long considering that the last common ancestor of humans and chimpanzees probably lived around 7 million years ago, and maybe as early as 12. It's hard to say exactly when because these estimates are based on studying the molecular clock inside our genes, or the average rate at which mutations occur. This is not an exact science, and our understanding of the process is not perfect, so estimates can vary. It's also complicated by the fact that interbreeding between our ancestors and theirs may have gone on for millions of years, though that's not universally agreed upon either. Anyhow, today I'm going to look at some contenders for our earliest ancestors, hominins that lived before that 4 million year mark in what we call the Miocene. And as you can probably tell by all the caveats in this introduction, when we're looking that far into the past, easy answers are pretty difficult to come by, but let's-a go! You would be forgiven for thinking that in the world we live in, it's easy to determine whether a fossil is one of our ancestors or a chimpanzee's. You just find the fossil, give it to a scientist, quick DNA test, bish bash bosh, ancestry confirmed. Sadly though, with the ages we're talking about, that's not possible. According to our best understanding, DNA will entirely break down after 6.8 million years, and that is in ideal preservation conditions of -5 degrees C, which obviously don't exist in the African savanna. The DNA would cease to be readable much earlier than that, around 1.5 million years. There has been some promising research into whether individual strands of protein, which survive longer, can be used to provide clues to ancestry, but as far as I'm aware, at the time of recording, that technique has not yet been applied to any of the fossils I'm going to discuss today. Long story short, we have to rely on the traditional methods of comparing anatomy, and the defining features that separate us from our chimpanzee cousins are big brains and bipedalism. We're pretty confident that bipedalism evolved first, so it's that trait that we're really looking for in the archaeological record. Teeth can help too. Our molars and premolars have thicker enamel than chimpanzees, and we also lack what's called the C-P3 honing complex. All known modern and fossil apes have what's called a honing canine. They're essentially fangs, and male apes use them as weapons during social conflicts. They're generally smaller in females. These upper canines stay sharp by rubbing or honing against the lower third premolar, which has a distinctive shape and position. Us humans, we don't have that C-P3 honing complex, and nor do any other hominins that we're aware of. So, if we find a fossil without it, it's a pretty good sign that they're on our side of the evolutionary tree. The downside of relying on comparing anatomies is that we can misplace fossils on the evolutionary tree, on the archaeological record, due to homoplasies. Basically, it's hard to say if the fossil is one of our ancestors, if it's a hominin, or if it's some other ape that just evolved a similar trait because of the same evolutionary pressures. With all that being said, let's take a look at some hominins. The oldest possible hominin on the list today is Sahelanthropus chadensis. Interestingly, this hominin was not found in East Africa, where most early hominins have been found so far, but in Chad, right in the Sahara Desert. It is believed that Sahelanthropus lived around 7 million years ago, based on dating the deposits around it, but accurate dating is tough because the fossils were found basically on the surface. Other than one femur, all the parts discovered belonged to the cranium. The biggest clue that this individual was a biped comes from the foramen magnum, the hole in the skull where it joins your neck. Ours is placed in the center of the skull to keep it balanced when we're walking upright or standing up straight. A chimpanzee's is placed towards the rear of the skull. Tumai's is sort of in between these two, but much more similar to ours than a chimpanzee's. It is therefore believed to be a biped by some. Also, the canines are quite small and only show wearing at the very tip, so this C-P3 honing complex is either absent or greatly reduced. However, there are some legitimate criticisms of the fossil too. A detailed study of that femur has not been published, so we can only rely on the information about the cranium. The problem with that, though, is that the cranium was quite badly distorted by the tests of time, and we're relying on computer remodeling to straighten it out a bit. I'm not saying they made a mistake doing that, or that we shouldn't use technology to help us, but obviously, anytime we're intervening, there's a potential for error. As for the teeth, the canines are only considered small because we believe the fossil discovered was a male. This identification rests on the truly colossal brow ridge Sahelanthropus is sporting. Without other body parts, though, we can't be sure if the specimen was really a male. If it was a female, then its canines would be on the same spectrum as other apes, particularly gorillas, and we might be looking at a member of their family tree rather than ours. Excavated in Aramis, Ethiopia, Adipithecus ramidus lived around 4.4 million years ago. We're fairly confident of the dating this time because the fossil sat on top of a layer of volcanic ash which was easily dated. One of the specimens excavated, called Adi, is truly incredible. It's actually the most complete early hominin ever discovered, more complete than its more famous cousin, Lucy. So what is it about this pile of bones that leads experts to think it was a hominin? Let's start with the head and work our way down. The skull that they found was crushed pretty badly, but they were able to reconstruct it. They found that this individual had a brain size of 300 to 350 cc's, about the size of a chimp, and smaller than Australopithecus and Homo naledi. Its muzzle sticks out quite a bit more than Australopithecus and has an overall primitive look to it, but it's flatter and more human-like than what we see in a chimpanzee. And once again, the foramen magnum is located towards the center of the skull and is not similar to chimps. In terms of teeth, there's no C-P3 honing, so that supports its classification as a hominin. And the teeth also reflect a more omnivorous diet than chimpanzees, which mostly eat fruit and leaves. But Adipithecus wasn't as quite adapted to heavy chewing and abrasive foods like Australopithecus and Homo, sort of in between us and chimps, basically. Let's keep moving down. Overall, Adi seems to have been about 120 centimeters tall and weighed about 50 kilograms. Honestly, below the neck, there's not that much that's modern about Adipithecus, mainly features of their hip and feet. The hip, which consists of the pelvis and the femur, is a hugely important region of the body when we're discussing bipedalism, because obviously its shape tells us how these things were moving around. In Adipithecus, the blades of the hip are shorter and orientated more towards the middle of the body in a somewhat modern way, rather than the side as in the primitive condition, more ape-like. Also, the neck of the femur, where the femur and the pelvis meet, is shorter than in other apes. These two aspects of the hip region indicate that some form of bipedality was going on at least occasionally, probably not all the time. We also see a bit of evidence of bipedalism in the generally primitive foot. The outer edge of the foot is rigid, which is necessary for putting pressure on it and not falling over. That's it, really. Just those few features are why it is considered a hominin rather than another form of ape. I know that's a pretty short list. A slightly older specimen that has been called Adipithecus cadaver dates to between 5.2 and 5.7 million years ago. Even though it does seem to have a C-P3 honing complex, its identification as a hominin rests largely on the angle of its toe bones. For us bipeds, our final little toe bone angles forwards. In other non-bipedal apes, it does not. Admittedly, that's a small clue, even less than Adipithecus ramidus, but it's a clue nonetheless. Don't discount the toe bones, people. I know everyone always overlooks those guys. Now, obviously, there are those that disagree. Adi had an ape-like big toe, a toe capable of grabbing things, acts like a thumb, separate from the rest of the digits, highly flexible. This is great for climbing trees to grasp branches, but not great for walking upright. Adi's fingers were also long compared to the rest of the hand, and Anatomy indicates that it put a lot of weight on its palms. So Adipithecus was clearly adapted to walking on all fours. If it was a biped, it probably wasn't bipedal all the time, not an obligate biped like we are. While it's tempting to view Adipithecus as the ancestor of Australopithecus, we still don't know where it goes in our family tree, but we can be reasonably sure that we've placed it on the right tree at least. This genus has been particularly important in teaching us not just about our ancestry, but about the ancestry of our great ape cousins as well. You know, a common misconception is that chimpanzees and gorillas haven't evolved since we split from our last common ancestor. Nothing could be further from the truth. You know, they've been evolving for 7 to 12 million years as well, and they're very specialized to the environments that they live in. There is a big debate around when knuckle walking evolved, and as Adipithecus seems to have put its weight on its palms, not its knuckles, that is sort of telling us that perhaps our last common ancestor was not a knuckle walker, which raises questions about when chimpanzees and gorillas evolved knuckle walking. And there's no answer to that question, basically, at the minute, so that's The last hominin of the day is known as Auroren tuganensis, found in the Tugan Hills in Kenya in 2000 and dated to 6 million years ago. Auroren is known from at least 2 individuals, consisting of parts of the mandible, some teeth, an upper arm fragment, finger bone, and fragments of a femur. It's thought to have weighed about 35 to 50 kilograms and stood at least 1.2 meters tall, which is bigger than Australopithecus. Even though Auroren was larger than Australopithecus, it had smaller teeth, which is interesting because so do we. That's a good sign that it was a hominin. But the femoral remains have gotten most of the attention as scientists tried to determine whether or not it was a biped. 3 fragments of femur were found, and the most complete one belongs to a young adult. Detailed analysis from multiple authors have shown that based on the shape of the femur, Auroren was at least partially bipedal. The overall shape looks similar to Australopithecus, which had somewhat smaller femoral head, a long femoral neck, and wide shaft. Even though we humans don't have this same shape, we know from more complete Australopithecus fossils like Lucy that they were bipedal too. So the fact that Auroren's femur looks like Australopithecus suggests that these 2 species moved around on the ground in somewhat similar ways, and that this way of moving evolved early in our hominin evolution. However, their finger bones are curved and shaped more like a chimpanzee's, more like a bonobo's, suggesting that there was some degree of arboreality, some degree of shuffling around in the trees. And some are not convinced that Auroren is a hominin because there just isn't that much of it that we've discovered yet, and we're really waiting for more finds. That's it. Those are the 3 main Miocene hominins that we've discovered so far, or potential hominins. As I said at the start, there's a lot of caveats around here. This is really a field where any discovery basically rewrites everything. So probably in 5-10 years' time, this video will be absolute garbage, if it isn't already. Ha 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 ha. Thanks for watching. Thanks to Amanda Rossio for helping me with the script. Thank you, as always, to the support of my generous Patreons. If you're into human evolution and archaeology, consider subscribing. Next month, we're going to be looking at possibly the biggest controversy in African archaeology, or at least the most debated issue. And maybe a video for you trivia heads too. We'll see. Thank you so much for watching. Boop.